Great. So this is going to be another little study here about Jesus, and as we started a couple of things ago about does Jesus understand my pain? Talked about that. Does Jesus understand my family? And so we're going to look at the question here: does Jesus care about me? Okay, so just this kind of little mini study I felt led to sort of explore. And so we're going to be talking about the compassion of Jesus today, and I've been finding that this particular word really does open up the heart of Christ, and seeing who he is. And Elaine and I were having a conversation there the other day where, sometimes the messaging that we use, in terms of the Gospels, we say, judgment's coming, be saved from punishment, come to know Christ, and that's all true. And then there's, the other side of that, which is, preaching about the love of God and, how God wants to get into your life and help you and that kind of thing. But we tend to kind of divorce all that away from each other. And we tend to kind of lock into, one particular kind of mode of messaging. Whereas, the message of Christ is a very holistic and very comprehensive thing, so we're just going to be looking at this compassion of Jesus. I'm going to be looking at a handful of verses in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where this word compassion is used. So we'll just look at initially Matthew 9, 35 through 38, which says this. It says, then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them, because they were weary and scattered, like sheep having no shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. But what I want to do is, as I do often, is look at the action words that are there. And I was noticing that with this word compassion, there is oftentimes another action that is associated with it. And so to sort of set the stage in this particular situation, Jesus was, much like Paul going around Greece, went about all the cities and villages, and he was doing three things. He was teaching, he was preaching, and he was healing. Okay, so that is the kind of the doing context of what Jesus is at, teaching in their synagogues. So teaching is what I do with you. It's basically taking information, taking knowledge, and trying to disseminate it to you in some kind of form that you get now. So at least you haven't left. So I must be doing something right. Yeah. Okay. We're all okay. Good. So there's this idea of teaching. Now, preaching is a different thing. Preaching is a proclamation. I think the old King James Bible would talk oftentimes about publishing abroad. Sometimes that's the kind of language that's used. So that's this idea of getting up and having strength and having vitality and having passion about getting out there and saying, look, there's a message from God here. And this is a great message. And so I could just imagine Jesus, as he's teaching in the synagogue, he's, engaging with people on kind of a horizontal sort of level. But now with the preaching, it's more, let's bring the kingdom of God down. Let's bring, vitality from God into your hearts. This is a good thing. That's because, as we've talked about, preaching is oftentimes associated with a prophetic gift. So, and prophecy, as we've talked about in 1 Corinthians 14, says it's useful for three things, and that is for encouragement, for edification, which is building up, and for comfort. Okay, for those three things. So I believe that when Jesus was preaching the gospel of the kingdom, he was incorporating those three elements, of encouraging people, because people were, downtrodden. It was interesting being in Athens, because you looked at the faces of people, and there was Athens is a big town. There's about 4 million that live there. Okay, so it's a big place, but you see the faces of people, and you see men in particular that are at the stalls for eating houses and restaurants and all that kind of stuff. And they are straight up in your face. It's like, you come, we have great food. And they're passionate about that. They're jumping around, but it's obviously money driven. It's like, we want you in here so you can spend as much money, So we went into one particular restaurant and didn't get any change of 70 euros, So between the two of us, but anyway. To get into the Acropolis was 30 euros each. This is wild money. But anyway, so sometimes you got to go and splurge and do these things. But then there was other shops of people selling things, and and you walk in the door and they're on you like flies on stink. It's just, it's like, right, okay, you're here and you're here to buy stuff. So we're here and we're going to tell you, and it's like, and if you say, we're just browsing, they're nearly like, all right, go away, so don't want you to browse, but Jesus is giving this message that is exciting, and people are glued to it. And but along with the teaching and the preaching, there's also this healing that he does. Now, I believe that the healing is a comprehensive thing. Oftentimes the words in the Bible that are where Jesus talks about, do you want to be made whole? That kind of language is not just about being physically whole, but it is about being spiritually and psychologically whole as well. Now, when Jesus spoke to the man by the pool of Bethesda in John 5, he said, basically, do you want to get better? Now, that was a very physical word. So sometimes Jesus, just went to the place that they were and just says, right, you're in a bad way physically. So do you want to be well physically? Say nothing about, spiritual things, but Jesus was dealing with people on a variety of levels. But in verse 36 there, it says, but when he saw. So that's the big operative word here. Is you looking to?
No, I was looking at saw, but not moved.
Right. Yep. So, but, and for those of you that would remember back in the Psalm 119 days when we did the study, now we're talking, 13 years ago? Anyway, it was when we did Psalm 119. Anyway, I did a side study, as I always did. I went down rabbit holes constantly. But I remember in Psalm 119, it talks about the servant. And that's the only way that the man in the writer in Psalm 119 refers to himself as a servant. And so we had looked at that particular word, Ebed, which means somebody who sees, somebody who understands. He takes responsibility for what is around him, but he is watching the door because he is waiting for the master to come. So he wants to be seen doing and taking responsibility. That's the servant. And but that first letter in that Hebrew word Ebed is a picture of the eye, and the eye was that thing that understood. And so the servant was somebody who saw. And so I then went off into this bunny trail of what did Jesus say? And it took us 5 weeks to get through it. So there was just piles and piles and piles of stuff in the Gospels about what Jesus saw. Well, here's one of them. So, we'll see that this is going to be this common linking word with compassion. So, yeah, yes. So you have to see and you have to understand. So Jesus sees the multitude. And as a result of what you see, then something happens. So, and now for Jesus, he sees things and that causes something to stir in his heart. So, he's not ambivalent. He's not, well, sure, there we go. There's them. Sometimes, I would imagine, say, people that again live in Athens, they see the Acropolis all the time. Now, somebody like myself, I went there and saw it for the first time. Now I've seen pictures of it. I'm like, whoa, now that's a serious thing, and you're just kind of blown away by what you see, and it causes something to rise up within you. But I would imagine after, say, living there for a lot of years, or whatever, you go, huh? There it is. And sometimes that's what happens in Christian life. We initially see something in our Christian walk, and we get buzzing about it, and then it wanes. And that happens in my work. I've been with STARS for over 27 years now, and sometimes I have to go and revisit and allow the Lord just to stir something up within me, because it's not natural to have compassion toward the people I work with, because sometimes you look at them and they go, well, they made their bed, they may lie in it. So Jesus was moved with compassion, and this word compassion has to do with the bowels. It's if you can imagine seeing something and then something wakens within you, and it's almost like your guts are just like, gotta do something. It's just nearly ants in your pants, kind of thing. And so you just you need to do something. So with Jesus having seen this this multitude, he's moved with compassion. There's a thing that's rising up within his guts. Just says, I have got to do something. It is not optional to stand there and do nothing. So he is moved with compassion for them, and it's interesting there. It gives a reason. And it says, because they were weary and scattered like sheep having no shepherd. So he's seeing these people, and and we're talking not a couple of dozen here. We're talking about probably thousands of people. An overwhelming number of people for your average person. But for Jesus, who has everlasting, his compassion goes so far beyond any of our compassion. Well, it does include that. It includes feeling sorry, having pity on people, but that is limiting, because what you end up thinking is like, oh, dear, love them. And well, hopefully something might be done. Something that we'll pray and ask God to go and raise up somebody to go and get into their life. Well, maybe God brought those people across your door, and then you need to do something. And so, yeah. And and Elaine and I saw on the subways an older woman, and she literally was dressed like a witch, and she had this black hood, and she just looked like she had been a widow for like a billion years or something like that. And she was walking up and down the subways, in the carriages, just with her hand out like this, and then looking at you and going, and the problem is then you don't know, because when I lived in Dublin, you had to understand that people that were begging weren't necessarily beggars. They were operating in gangs and all that kind of stuff. And when you put your hand in your pocket like this, they're watching, other eyes are watching, and then you'll be pickpocketed, so, or something, so I remember walking in Grafton Street, kind of evening time, down in Dublin. And I was walking, and there was a Gardaí woman, now they're unarmed, but she was on her own. I don't understand what was going on there, but anyway, she kind of disappeared. And so as I was walking, I saw two people come at me from my blind spot. One came out of one door and the other came out of the other door. And they came up to me, deliberately in my blind spot, so that, whichever way I turned, I couldn't see both of them. And so then they came up to me and kind of, stood in my face and says, "Do you have 17p?" Like, 17p? Now, fortunately, I didn't have any cash on me at all back then. But, that there's something all fishy about this kind of thing. So it's being wise about this sort of stuff. But, Jesus sees this. He sees weary people, scattered people, having no shepherd type people. And that's what he sees. And that's why compassion is there.
Sees right into the inner being too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Now I've run into people that have genuine need, but you're right. I mean, you do have to have the eyes of God and say, no, this person's not yet. And sometimes it's hard just to go, talk to the hand, the face ain't listening, But so then Jesus makes this statement, and now sometimes we don't associate words as an action, but they are. Okay, so because Jesus sees, he's moved with compassion because of the thing. So, and then as a result of this, he says, okay, he makes a statement. And so that's as much of an action as anything else. So he says, the harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. So, right, let's look at another verse here. So Matthew 14, and this is the beginning of the feeding of the 5,000, which is the one story that is found in all four of the Gospels. So it says, when Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. Now, this is when he heard that John the Baptist was killed. Okay, so he hears this and goes, I need to get offside. But when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. And when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude. So here's our word saw again. And what happens? He was moved with compassion for them and healed their sick. Despite the fact that Jesus was distracted, okay, so, humanly, when you hear that your cousin has been brutally killed, with his head chopped off and taken on a platter to some girl, and because he knows all the detail about this, humanly, he's just going, I need to get offside. So I need to be sort of on my own. So, and that's what it says. He departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. But, people being people, boom, find out where he is, follow him on foot from the cities, so it's not just the city, it's, whole, piles of towns. But again, when Jesus sees this, and the Bible describes it as a great multitude, he was moved with compassion. So this thing just wells up within him because he can't deny himself. Jesus is full and moved with compassion. and despite his tiredness, despite the fact that he's humanly distracted, he heals their sick. So I think, in terms of, answering this question, does Jesus, care about me? Put yourself in the multitudes, and because I know Jesus sees every one of you. He sees where you're at. He sees all your problems. He sees where what your past is and how that can, sometimes, confine us or take away from us in some way. And yet Jesus is moved with compassion for us, to say, look, I know what's going on and I'm there, so, just the next chapter over, which is actually the feeding of the 4,000. It says, now Jesus called his disciples to himself and said, I have compassion on the multitude because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I do not want to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. So this is the feeding of the 4,000, which is a story that we don't find as often as the feeding of the 5,000. But anyway, but Jesus makes the statement here himself, where he says, I have compassion on the multitude. Again, this is the same word. So all the words of compassion that we'll be looking at today is all the same Greek word. There's other words that are translated compassion, but I've selected out this particular one. So not. I think, in sort of looking at this particular verse, Jesus called his disciples to himself and says this. Okay, so this is a teaching moment, all right, because what he wants to do, as it says in Romans 8, that he has predestined us to be conformed to the image of his son. So God's goal for you is to be like Jesus. And so he is, because Jesus could have just himself, there's these people, I have compassion on them, this is what I'm going to do. But he wants to pass this on, to his disciples, because he wants his disciples to be conformed to his image. And so he makes this statement, I have compassion on this, on the multitude. Again, gives a reason, because they've continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. So they've been, listening to Jesus for 3 days. I mean, could you imagine having a preaching meeting for 3 days? It's, we struggle in church for an hour, and if it goes past 11:30, we're looking at our watch. So unless your man's really good or something like that, then we're looking at the watch about quarter to one. So, I know in some places I've been around the world, people will speak and go on, and everybody's locked in, and that's not a problem. So I can imagine that Jesus, was able to hold people's attention. Remember when I was in Portugal back in 1982, which was my first missionary experience as a 16-year-old, and there was an American fellow that lived there as a missionary, and he did open air meetings, and his open air meetings lasted for 4 hours, and people were standing there for 4 hours listening to this guy. But what he did was he didn't just speak. He had this way of demonstrating things, and he would take little sticks, and if you can imagine a piece of stick that has then a little fork, somewhere, there's a branch coming, out one end or the other. But he would take that, and he would take a pen knife, and he would start carving this thing and turning it into a little rooster. And so he was then showing the people at the open air how to make a little rooster out of your dead stick. And, so basically what he was demonstrating was, here's a worthless thing, but in my hands, it can be turned into something of worth. And so he was then talking about the gospel in terms of how Jesus can come and take you that you think you have no worth, and he can make you into something. So, and he was showing all these people and getting people to get their little knives out, and they were all carving little roosters and chickens and all sorts of stuff. But he had people captivated, and Jesus in the same way does that.
Thinking to myself, sometimes we sit in churches that are maybe not long, but they seem long because of the speaker. And there's other people saying, I gotta listen to that person all day. So I imagine that if you're sitting listening to Jesus,
Yeah.
if you're going to be captivated by a human talking to you, and you're sitting there with Jesus talking to you, imagine you're they've been trying to drag me away from him rather than encourage me to sit.
But Jesus understands physicality of things, because he says these people have continued with him for 3 days. They have nothing to eat, and I don't want to send them away hungry.
Reading that, I was thinking to myself, now if that was us, we would be assuming they're hungry because they haven't eaten for a certain time. But Jesus, being God, would know that they're hungry because he would be able to, because of who he is. To make any assumptions.
He even was concerned of their physical things, as he said about
So, and this is why this compassion really is very holistic. It's very comprehensive. Because I think again, sometimes when people are preaching, or teaching the gospel or whatever, they'll go with a almost exclusively spiritual message, but there's nothing about physical things or even psychological things. The big buzzword with today is about my mental health, and that's a big talking point, and people kind of fling that around a fair bit, and that can capture a lot of different situations. But Jesus is concerned about your mental health, so and I would imagine our bodies are all linked up. It's the Bible talks about having a spirit, a soul, and a body. So we're a tripart being. There is an argument in theology where, and I've actually talked to my aunt about this at length, about, are we a bipart or a tripart? Bipart meaning that we have a soul and a body. Tripart meaning that we have a spirit, a soul, and a body. So that's so a bi is 2, tri is 3. Okay, so and sometimes people get hung up on these things. I was reading a book on the plane. I finished my book about the heart of Jesus, and a very readable sort of book. And then I picked up another book that I brought called The Revelation of the Cross by J.I. Packer. Now, if you've read J.I. Packer, he would be known for knowing God, that particular book. But it's deep, sort of real cerebral sort of stuff, and yeah, you being the brain surgeon, so but sometimes you look at that, and especially when you've moved from kind of this the heart of Jesus sort of book that the language is very easy and easy to understand, and then you get into this really deep sort of thing, because he was getting into the Trinity and talking about all the various angles and aspects of that, and you're just going, your head's just about ready to explode. So but it's good too, so but it can be hard. Right. Let's look at another Matthew verse here, and this is in regard to well, we'll put it up here. This is about the servant that was brought to the king who owed 10,000 talents. Okay, and so we had talked about that story back in when we did the Parables of the Kingdom series. And when he had begun to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. But as he was not able to pay, his master commanded that he be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and that payment be made. And the servant therefore fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. And then the master of that servant was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave him the debt. So So this word of compassion here is, and basically moved with compassion. That phrase is actually one word. Okay, it's 3 words in English, but it's 1 word in Greek. So because of the indebtedness that this man had, and if you remember when we talked about this, 10,000 talents was equivalent to 250,000 years worth of wages. Okay, so the man was not going to be able to get his credit card out or his phone or whatever cash he had and say, "Sir, just hang in there, and I'll. Do you take plastic?" It's just, that's not happening. So and dear Levin, he does try. He says, "Master, have patience with me, and I'll pay you all." I mean, that's not doable. You can't do 250,000 years worth of wages. It's just not happening. So, but the master of the servant, and the master of the servant in this passage is a picture of God. He's moved with compassion, but it's not just a feeling. Okay, it's not just a motivation. This motivation results in things. It says he releases him and forgives him the debt. So, sometimes we encounter people and run into people who have done us wrong, and really the last thing we want to do is we want to have compassion on them. We want to go stick it where the sun don't shine, and or I'm going to hold this against you. I'm going to poke you with the rod of blame and stick you until the cows come home, and that's an easy human space to be in, because we feel like that we have control, because we can say, "Yeah, I'm in control of you," but actually, what happens within this story is that it then consumes the person, so you end up being in your own prison. So, but the master of the servant does not want to be in some sort of bitter prison. So, and again, because God is moved with compassion, he, by nature, then releases him. That's what God does. And so he not only releases him sort of in physical terms, but also there is this debt. And the word debt in the Old Testament is a very interesting word. It means to be under constant pressure. So it's kind of like looking over your shoulder and, is the creditor going to come? And, so he forgives him. He releases him, forgives him the debt. Why? Because he has at least 10,000 talents worth of resources within him to do it. So now, do we have them sort of resources? No, not naturally, but you see, in God, we do. So, so sometimes when we're thinking about situations in our own life, the devil, might come along and say, you deserve to be bitter. You deserve to blame those people because they're nasty pieces of work, and it's, yeah, that's grand, that's super, but the thing is that that's not God's heart. God's heart is to release. God's heart is to forgive, because that's what God wants to do. And so, so compassion here is then associated very much with release, with forgiveness.
Thinking that we're talking about not forgiving somebody. If you don't forgive somebody, God forgive you. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what this whole story is really about. As I say, the forgiven person is a forgiving person. So.
We do get that sometimes.
Oh, we do get thick. Yes. Oh, absolutely. So yeah, and we feel like we have the right. So oops. Sorry, same one. Matthew 20, a couple of different verses here. So it says, "Now as they went out of Jericho, a great multitude followed him. And behold, 2 blind men sitting by the road, when they had heard that Jesus was passing by, cried out, saying, 'Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David.' And then the multitudes warned them that they should be quiet, but cried out all the more, saying, 'Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David.' So Jesus stood still and called them, and says, what do you want me to do for you? And then they said, Lord, that our eyes may be opened. So Jesus had compassion and touched their eyes, and immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him. So now this particular story, I believe, is the same story in regard to like Bartimaeus. Okay, so because the scene of Jericho is the same as with Bartimaeus, and also with the blind man that is mentioned in the end of Luke 18, just before Zacchaeus, which was going in the opposite direction. But anyway, so now it says here that there were two blind men. So there was two blind men. Okay, but the other gospels focus in on one particular person. Okay, so it's not that it's a different situation. It's just that the Matthew tends to summarize things, and this is why sometimes the readings in Matthew are a little bit different in terms of their stories compared to the other gospels, because the other gospels are much more step by step, blow by blow. Here's the detail and so on. Whereas what Matthew tends to do, because he's a Jewish man and he's writing from a Jewish sort of angle, how their writing tended to go was you summarize things. And so their stories in Matthew tend to be a little bit sharper and shorter. Whereas if you looked at the whole scene with Bartimaeus in Mark 10, it's a much more drawn out exercise. Okay, much more detail. So they're crying out, "Have mercy on us, son of David." There's a lot of similarities here in terms of that particular story, but I do love verse 32 where it says, "So Jesus stood still." I think that's a great line. Because they're calling out to they need mercy. They're referring to Jesus as Lord, and also this messianic title of Son of David. So they know exactly who Jesus is and address him appropriately. And so that causes Jesus to stand still. Yeah. So, he stopped, so, if you can think in your own life, again, when there's needs and all these kinds of things, cry out to the Lord Jesus Christ. He stands still. He stops. Jesus doesn't go, sorry, don't have time for this sort of mediocrity here. Yeah. We're important to him. Yeah. And so he stands still. And this is why in my teaching, I emphasize these action words, because when you get into these stories, you have to look at the action. I remember going through the story of Bartimaeus with my cousin one time, who was a trained actor, and he had a drink problem. And I said, right, let's look at this as a script. I says, you pretend you're Bartimaeus, and you think how you would act this out, and how you would engage with the other actor, Jesus, and all this kind of stuff. And he really rose to it, because he was like, I'm an actor. I read scripts, and so. And sometimes that's how we have to talk to people, is we find out, a lot of times what I do in my work is I find out what people know, what people's interests are and that kind of stuff. And being an American, so, people go, "Oh, you're an American. What do you think about," or whatever. And it's not, a lot of it tends to be quite political, in more recent weather, but anyway. So then Jesus asks this question, "What do you want me to do for you?" And so they respond with, "Lord, that our eyes may be opened." And so here we go, verse 34. So Jesus had compassion. So here's the same word here. Because, Jesus hears these things, he stands still, calls them, says a thing to them. They make a response to this. So Jesus, that causes Jesus to move. to really have a lot of action. So what does he do? He touches their eyes. So he's not standing there going, "Oh, dear, love you. I kind of know where you're going, and I understand, and sure." It's because he has power, he can do that. He can touch their eyes. Now, the wonderful thing about when Jesus touches eyes in the Gospels is that not only does he give them the ability to see, but he gives them the ability to perceive, which is to understand what you say. So, there's that kind of strange story in Mark 8 that where Jesus had to touch the man twice. Remember, he asked the man, "What do you see?" And he says, "I see men like trees walking." So, and I think, it's a strange story because it's like, well, what happened there? Was Jesus' first touch not good enough? Well, I think sometimes what happens is that because that man, he really wasn't seeking help. It was others that brought him to Jesus. And so I would imagine that he probably had an expectation of what sight was like. So his expectation only took him to that point. And so then Jesus touched him again, and he was restored, and he was then able to see clearly. So I think sometimes it's about our expectation. As Jesus talked about, with the measure you use, it'll be measured back to you. Now I know the context of that particular verse was about judgment and assessment and that kind of thing, but there's a greater sort of principle there. Whereas if you go to God with a certain level of expectation, if you go to God with your cup and say, "Lord, fill my cup," well, he'll fill the cup. But if you go to God with a big lorry, he'll fill your lorry. But what's your expectation? Is it a cup or is it a lorry? So I think oftentimes we say, "Well, Jesus, here's my teaspoon. Fill it." And God's, "Yep, yeah. But I want to bless your socks off, but you can't contain it. So your expectation is shot." So
Based on how in the other stories where Jesus says people just say that and immediately they receive their sight.
Yeah.
Whereas he asked them in that stage, "What do you say?" Yeah.
So and which is a very interesting question. Is what do you perceive? How do you understand what you say? So. Yeah. So and then what you have at the end of verse 34, immediately their eyes receive sight, and what do? Follow Jesus, because that's the only reasonable response.
What do you need?
Yeah.
Do what they needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, because. Yeah. Because it on the surface, it seems like a stupid question. Now, I say that reverently, but it's not it's a very insightful question, because Jesus, again, doesn't need to know what the problem is, because he does know everything about this situation. But I think as Jesus engages with us, he desires to hear our assessment of it. How do we perceive things?
The story of the Lord comes down to Sodom. And he tells Abraham, says, "I'm going down here to see if this has come up before me." Well, God knows exactly what. Yeah. And then he goes through the whole thing. If you find
50 and 45 and 40 and 30, yeah.
And then whenever God does destroy it, Abraham knows that God gave him the chance.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. So
And the one with the issue of blood touched Jesus' garment. He said, "Who touched me?" But he knew who touched him.
Yeah.
But he wanted her to say that it was her.
Yeah. So and tell the whole truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the questions of Jesus are extraordinary. Very, very interesting things to study. So I would use similar lines of questioning with the people that I sit with. Because, well, I'm not Jesus, so I don't know, but I remember in the early days asking a lady one time who had a drink problem. I says, what do you want me to do for you? And she says, "I want you to stop my drinking. I want you to stop my smoking, and I want you to get my kids back for me." It's like, Okay, at least I understand what you want.
Yeah.
I can't deliver that, but at least I know what you want. So anyway, but just, a very interesting sort of things of compassion here. So I'm going to look at one verse out of Mark and then one verse out of Luke, and then that'll finish us up. So now a leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling down to him and saying to him, if you're willing, you can make me clean. And then Jesus, moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, I am willing, be cleansed. And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. And he strictly warned him and sent him away at once and said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go your way, show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing those things which Moses commanded as a testimony to them. However, he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the matter, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter the city, but was outside in the deserted places, and they came to him from every direction. So, but here we have this line of compassion there in verse 41. So then this is a result of a leper doing four things. Okay, there's four action words here. So the first one is he came. Okay, so he came to Jesus. He implores Jesus. That's the second action of imploring. He's begging Jesus, kneeling down to him. So he acknowledges who Jesus is in terms of authority and being God. And so, he comes, he implores, he gets on his knees, and then he makes a statement. He says, if you're willing, you can make me clean. So, again, interesting, the words that people use. I think sometimes, again, when we come to God somewhat mousy. And, we pray not very deep prayers. God bless mommy and daddy, amen, or something. It's sometimes that level of thing and kind of shopping list stuff. But here's this man. I think there's tremendous amounts of things we can learn from this about coming to Jesus, imploring Jesus, getting down on your knees, saying to him, if you're willing, you can make me clean. What happens? Moved with compassion. So, and so again, look at the action words after moved with compassion, stretches out his hand, touches him. Now that was bad crack back then. That was a no. But you see, because if you touched a leper, you got it. Okay. You were ceremonially unclean at the very least. And, but the fact is that Jesus never gets dirtied by your stuff. He can't be tainted by your things, because what he has within himself is cleansing power. He can forgive you. He can deal with your sin. He can deal with your wretchedness and all that crap that's all floating around in him. So he stretches out his hand, he touches him, and then makes a statement, I am willing, be cleansed. He feeds directly into what the guy's statement is. Because the man said, if you're willing, you can make me clean. And then what Jesus says, I am willing, be cleansed. So he's using language that is directly related to where this guy is. So as soon as he's spoken, immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. Now he tells him to go and present himself to the priest, because that's what the Old Testament designated in terms of dealing with various sorts of skin ailments. But as it says in verse 45, the guy went out and began to proclaim freely, and that caused a situation where Jesus was not able to might get into the towns, so because Jesus wants to engage with you personally. He doesn't want to be just seen as some kind of miracle worker, where everybody's all buzzing around and they go, oh, I'm bad news here. Help me. And then when you get help, people kind of say, thanks, Jesus, you're dead on. I'll head on my merry way, but that's not the right response. I remember going with a guy to court one time, and I met with him a whole lot of times beforehand. I always thought he was a little more too accepting of the help, because he's like, all right, so so what do I need to do to get saved? So what do I need? Right, okay, blah, 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 blah. Can you come to court with me? So anyway, went to court. Guy got a suspended sentence or something like that, didn't get custodial, and came up to me afterwards, shook my hand. Thanks, that's great.
My father was a functional alcoholic, and he couldn't have believed his oath. He couldn't have believed his oath. He promised me stars.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, I know. And unfortunately, people from those backgrounds, they tell their lies so often that it becomes truth to them. Those that are on the outside looking in, you go, this guy is full of mad dogs, and you can't believe the thing he says. But they'll keep on spinning that same line, because that's all they know. And
they get to the stage where they nearly believe it.
Oh, sure, yeah. So sure, yeah. No, it's yeah, I remember when Albert McDonald, who was the first man to get saved at Ballyards Castle, he felt that he had grown up in gospel halls and all that kind of stuff, and basically says, I don't want this. And he was always making deals. It's like, well, God, when I'm 18, I'll come to you. When I'm 21, I'll come to you. When I'm this age, so I got kicked down the road a whole lot of times. So became chronically addicted to alcohol, and marriage was on the rocks. Everything was essentially lost. So he goes to Ballyards, and then God touches him, and he gets saved, and soundly saved. And so he brings up his wife, all excited, saying, I just became a Christian. And she says, yeah, and I have the divorce papers here. Yeah, and big deal. Now the Lord restored that marriage, and praise the Lord for that. But anyway. Right, one more thing here from Luke 7. So this is not all the words of compassion that are used in the Gospels, but suffice to say, this is a good smattering. So this is the widow of Nain. So it happened the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and a large crowd. And when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, as our Lord saw, he had compassion on her and said to her, do not weep. And then he came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still. And he said, young man, I say to you, arise. So he who was dead sat up and began to speak, and he presented him to his mother. And then fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, a great prophet has risen up amongst us, and God has visited his people. So this is, again, another great story. It's only 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So, 6 verses. So Jesus, it says here, now it happened the day after. So then when you go and backpedal and see what happened the day before, Jesus was up in Galilee. Okay, so that he went to a city called Nain. Well, Nain is 20 miles away. So everybody walks. Jesus didn't have a horse, didn't have a donkey. He had a donkey when Mary had a donkey, but you never ever read about Jesus like riding a horse or riding or even being in a cart and being pulled around. So this was a walking exercise. So The most I've ever walked in one day, I think, is about 17 miles. So, and that was in an afternoon. That was walking from Bray down to Wicklow, down County Wicklow. So then got the train back. But that was 17 miles. But Nain was a nothing place. It says that it's a city. It was hardly a city. It was a hamlet. I mean, it was a collection of about a dozen houses, maybe. So it was not a big place. Nobody cared about Nain. Nain was off the beaten track. It wasn't on the main road. There was nothing about the place that would bring anybody there. No tourists, nothing. So, but Jesus is compelled to go here, so he goes, and so they get. There's a large crowd, and when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, who was a widow. So we have a lot of detail here in terms of what's going on. We have a dead son. He's the only son, and his mom's a widow. So we have an economic situation here that is absolutely dire, because if you're a widow and your son's dead, there's no brew, okay? There's no social. So you have a nothing town, a nothing woman, a dead man. It's not good. So, so a large crowd from the city was with her. Now, at least, look, we've all been to funerals. Okay, and you know what happens at funerals. Everybody comes, everybody gathers around the family and goes, I'm sorry for your loss. If there's anything I can do for you, I'm here for you. Do you mean a word of it? No, you don't. So now you might at the time, but it comes to nothing very often. So I would imagine the large crowd from the city was with her. They were probably of that ilk. It's like, oh, dear, love you. You lost your son. And if we can provide a casserole for you, or get you some milk, yeah, we can do that. And then that lasts for about 2 days. And then dust settles. It says, when the Lord saw her, okay, here's saw again, had compassion. So what Jesus sees starts a ball rolling of lots of things. The first one's compassion. So there's this thing that wells up within Christ. So had compassion on her. So that thing that he has within himself is projected to her and her alone. Okay, this is for her. And so he then says, okay, this is your next action word. So do not weep. So what Jesus is then giving to her is words of hope. Jesus is not half empty type person, nor is he a half full type person. He's a full type person. So do not weep. So he issues words of hope here. Now, as they say, talk's cheap. Okay, because if this story stopped here, all we have is Jesus having compassion and go, there's hope there in there. Yep. But what does he do? There's stuff that happens. Then he came. I did a study a couple of years ago about where it says he came or Jesus came. Great study. Great study. I've been to places where people were expecting me to come and they're standing at the door. Waiting, because they have a need and they want words of hope and affirmation or whatever they're looking, and they see me pull up in the car and they're standing at the door. And so he came. Could you imagine if Jesus never came? It doesn't bear thinking about. He came, and what does he do? He touches the open coffin. So again, he's doing a very big no-no here, because you touch anything that's dead, set for 7 days, you are ceremonially toast, so, but he touches that which is unclean. So he engages with it. So he's able to get into your lives and touch where you're at, even the death of things. So as a result of this, everybody stops. Those who carried him stood still. And then Jesus says another thing. Okay, so this is the second statement that Jesus makes. He says, young man, I say to you, arise. Now, if Jesus said just arise, everybody in the flaming graveyard would have gotten up. So Jesus has to go and single this particular person out and say, young man, I say to you, arise. Okay, so that limits it, down to this particular person. So basically, when Jesus, when Jesus went to Lazarus, and raised Lazarus from the dead, what he says, Lazarus, come forth. Now, if Jesus just said, come forth, everybody within the vicinity would have just popped out of the ground. So Jesus is very specific, and he's very personal, because he's and he's doing this for the mom, and for him, but I think most of this is for the mommy. So he said, young man, I say to you, arise. So he who was dead sat up. When Jesus Christ speaks words of resurrection power into your life, you know what you do? You sit up. You sit up. And then he begins to speak.
The amazing thing there for me, get taken out of that. If you were to speak to a dead body, you'd be sitting yourself there.
If you sat up,
Somebody alive, that's one thing, but talking to somebody who's dead.
So
That big bird, where it says, and the dead will hear his voice.
Yeah.
And they'll rise out of the ground.
Yeah. So it's
blows you away.
Yeah. So no, it's an amazing thing to contemplate what that situation would be like. Because you remember what happened with Jairus's daughter. Jesus says she's just sleeping, and they ridiculed him. They thought he was off his rocker. So he begins to speak, and then this is the last thing that Jesus does. He presented him to his mother. See, it was for her. Yeah, this is the tenderheartedness of Jesus. This is him being lowly in heart and full. He just overflows. Yeah. So
That would be one of my favorite stories in the process. I've read it many times, and then I read it about also Edersheim, a Jewish convert, and he entitled that story When Death Met Life. And he pointed out that in the presence of Jesus, the Prince of Life, death could not exist. And then he went on to say, we will all die, but in eternal life, death cannot exist because Jesus is eternal life. And that suddenly put the resurrection into complete focus for me. In the presence of Jesus, death can't exist. In the Prince of Life, death simply cannot exist.
Yeah. And that's a very interesting thing to think about, because what it demonstrates is that death actually isn't a thing.
Yes.
Because you know what the definition of darkness is? It's the absence of light. So darkness actually isn't a thing. Soon as light is present, there is no darkness. It's the same with heat now, and cold. Cold is just the absence of heat. I mean, that might sound daft, but at the temperature of absolute zero, which is what, minus 273 degrees Celsius or something like that, you cannot get colder than that, because that's when atomic movement actually stops. But as soon as heat is there, or some presence of movement, that's gone. So that is cold. But anyway, so it's the same with life. Life is or death is merely the absence of life. So again, sounds a bit sort of obvious, but that means that death actually isn't a thing. As soon as the Prince of Life comes, death is vanquished.
You know where they whenever it says that Jesus wept when Lazarus died.
Yeah.
Well, in my thinking, I would think that in Jesus' head, he would be saying, "Don't be crying, I'm going to raise him. Yes, I'm going to raise him." It's silly demonstrated to us. But he cries. The tears are up.
Is that human too?
Well, yeah, it is a strange verse, and there is because of where it's positioned in the gospel. Yeah, shortest verse in the Bible. So, because is it about Jesus commiserating with them in their grief, or is it Jesus sad at their unbelief? Or is he sad because he's going to be taking Lazarus out of the eternal state? And so that, there's these various kinds of angles that you can, so, and I think in a lot of ways, probably they're all sort of have some truth and validity to it. So, because the Bible wants us to come at it, with correctness. We need the Spirit to give us enlightenment about what it means. But sometimes verses like this are deliberately ambiguous, because what it causes you to do is you say, okay, I want to ask these questions. And so where is Jesus with this? Where is he? So I believe that, yes, Jesus does commiserate with our grief. He identifies with our grief, but I think at the same time he's weeping because of their unbelief in terms of grasping things. But it could be too that Lazarus is in a far better place, and I'm going to have to bring him back.
I hadn't thought of that about when Lazarus came back. Did anybody else say to Lazarus,
"Where did you go?"
That time that you were dead there? Did you experience anything? And I think, people has different views on it. And I think to myself, well, maybe we know that whenever you die, it's absent from the body, the presence of the Lord. But I think in those cases, Jesus knew he was going to raise him.
Oh, sure, yeah.
He didn't go anywhere.
Yeah. So yes, and so maybe that third statement I've made, which I've read, may not be a completely valid sort of idea, because really Jesus knew that he was going to bring him back.
Well, where did if Lazarus died and is absent from, especially you're talking to Jehovah's Witnesses who don't believe in that, they believe in soul sleep, we say, well then if that was the case, then Lazarus should be able to give his experience with what happened to him from he died until Jesus raised him back up again. And I thought to myself, well, maybe he didn't go anywhere, maybe Jesus didn't allow his soul to move.
Yeah. So now I think in the cogitation of these sorts of things, sometimes you can get then wrapped up in an idea or a teaching that really isn't even there. And the devil would want us to get all hung up on a variety of things. No, and sometimes that's why it is ambiguous, because Jesus is saying, look, you're not going to understand this in the here and now. I'll teach it to you forever when you get to heaven, and you'll get it then.
Why is he weeping?
I didn't understand why Jesus wept, but Alfred Emerson pointed out that in the Jewish belief of those days, a person could come back to life for up to 3 days, but after the third day, the soul departed forever and could never come back. And that's why Jesus waited, to show that he had the power.
Because it's 4 days.
Demonstrating, that's only my opinion, but he was also demonstrating, I have the power to rise from the grave too. I have the power over death. I have the power to lay my life. I have the power to take it again. you know, starting,
Then you have the people who talk about the swoon theory.
oh, that's
I mean,
nonsense.
even the 3 days doesn't do away with that, they believe.
Yeah.
You know,
That's total rubbish.
you know,
Yeah.
I know it is.
Study all those
Things.
Yes, and I think, it is okay to ask questions.
Yeah.
It's okay to, in a sense, to doubt, you know, but as long as you say, God, I don't get this, I don't understand it, it wrecks my head. Yes, but you say, you said this, so I have to buy into it.
There are only 2 records of anyone surviving crucifixion. One, Josephus went to Titus and begged for 2 of his friends to be taken down from the cross in AD 70. They took them down after about an hour. One died, and the other was after 1 hour. The other was the only one who survived, but it was me. So this swoon, and a sword in his side, and of course the blood and the water coming out is the classic sign the heart is punctured.
They say that the beating, that the scourging,
Yes.
and that Jesus thought he should have been dead before he was put in it.
Yes, that was part of the point. That was part of it to make sure.
A lot of people didn't survive.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
So,
But you know, that's Josephus points out in himself that is the only two ever. But the boy didn't. After an hour, one of them couldn't survive.
mhm.
But what I'm saying to Woody is, you know, is it right as a Christian to think then things like, why did Jesus cry? And
Yeah,
Oh yes, but then you start to think them on through.
you know,
Yeah.
You know, it's all this theory about the swoon theory and all of that. Like, it's like the Big Bang theory. Nothing produced. I'm sorry, I just.
Yeah, I know.
You
It's
can
a-
think, you can think of things,
It's so
2
ridiculous.
different sort of, you know, you can ask the thing and wonder how that happens just for your own whatever. But a lot of these other people ask the thing for to try and make the thing out to be a lie.
yes,
Mhm.
yes.
You know, like a child asks you something innocently, you try to explain it to it. But I mean, some of the theories that,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
like I remember talking to a wee man one time and he couldn't understand how Jesus was raised from the dead, and I thought to myself, do you believe all the Bible right till you get to that?
Mhm.
You know, because you've God making the word out of nothing. How do you explain that?
And the only
So we have no problem with that. We have no problem. Do you believe that
Yeah.
God did made
Yeah.
a thing in 7
No,
days? Yeah. Well, did you believe God that made a human body could put life back into it again? He started off with nobody. He started off with clay
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
and breathed it.
And it's amazing. All that's in a human body is 6 buckets of water, so much iron, so much thing. That's all the human body is.
Mhm.
I mean, a motor mechanic can fix a car, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can make one.
That's correct.
So the guy who makes it, I would say, I have no problem
Mhm.
fixing it.
So,
Yes, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but in his head, he knew he was going to raise it. Yeah. So I would say.
I always,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.